أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الغوي الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير الناصرين، ثم الصلاة والسلام وتحيته والإكرام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله. قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: وقوله الحق وهو أصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. آمنا به. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Scholars, elders, brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To carry on our discussion from yesterday, where did we leave off? We left off our discussion by examining the symptoms of qaswat al-qalb, the symptoms of the hardening of the heart. We mentioned that one of the symptoms of the hardening of the heart is that it blocks out the tears, meaning that the person cannot cry. It's very difficult for a person to shed tears. That one of the symptoms of qaswat al-qalb is that the person cannot cry. The second symptom of qaswat al-qalb is that people become annoyed when it comes to ma'rifat of the religion of Islam, when it comes to learning and gaining knowledge about the religion of Islam. A person, it becomes a burden on him to learn about the religion of Islam, and that means in turn it becomes a burden on him to come towards the masjid, or to come towards the mosque, and to take part in the activities of the mosque. The third of the symptoms of qaswat al-qalb is that the person is infatuated with dunya, that he will run behind dunya, he will prioritize his life focusing on dunya when there are other priorities far more important than dunya, than his businesses, for example. The fourth symptom of qaswat al-qalb is that the person will engage in sins and he will belittle sins. As the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam beautifully says that the worst sin is what? Ma ashaddu dhunub ma istahana bihi sahibihi, that the worst sin is when a person belittles a sin. Meaning that when a person begins to commit a sin, sins in itself, and we'll come to this in the upcoming discussions, in the upcoming nights, the sin in itself has an addictive nature, in the sense that when I commit a sin the first time, if I'm exposed to a particular sin for the first time in my life, it is heavy on me, it is a burden on me. The guilt is overwhelming. The guilt is overwhelming in my life. Have you seen a child the first time he begins to lie? Yes, when a child lies the first time, he cracks there's cracking in his voice, for example, his voice cracks, for example, he's sweating, yes, he moves about, he doesn't establish eye contact. You know that the child is lying, but he behaves in this way because the guilt is overwhelming for him. When he exposes himself to a sin for the first time, it's difficult for him, and therefore he cannot compose himself properly. In the same way, when we are exposed to a sin the first time, it is overbearing on us. But when we commit a sin the second time, it's much easier than the first. When we commit the same sin the third time, it is far more easier than the first and the second time. To the extent that when I continuously and repeatedly commit a particular sin, it becomes part and parcel of my life. It becomes easy and easier, to the extent that it becomes easy as breathing. That when I commit a sin, I do not think about it being a sin. I commit the sin nevertheless. It's no longer a bearing in my life. It's no longer an It's no longer a thing that brings about guilt in my life. Here the Prophet says that the worst sin is the sin that becomes easy on a person. The worst sin, the worst of sins, is the sin that becomes a belittling. It becomes belittled in the eyes of the one performing it. So the fourth symptom of qaswat al-qalb is when a person belittles a sin. And when a person reaches the stage of qaswat al-qalb, as the Quran emphasizes this in a few number of verses, the Quran says, أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ, that this person becomes so low, he drives himself so low in the reality of things that he becomes like animals. He becomes like the beasts of the world. أُولَٰئِكَ كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. No, he becomes worse than the animals. The fourth stage, or the third and the fourth stages of the person who has qaswat al-qalb, according to the ayat of the Holy Quran, is ثُمَّ قَسَتْ قُلُوبُكُم مِّن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ فَهِيَ كَالْحِجَارَةِ, that their hearts become as hard as rocks. And the worst state is less, this is a worse state, this is a worse state in comparison to being like animals. As animals, at least they have some sense of feeling, but a rock doesn't have a sense of feeling. Yes, the hearts become like rocks. Bal ashad qaswa. No, the fourth stage is even worse than the rocks. It becomes harder than the rocks. That the heart has this capacity to become hardened, more harder than the rocks. Then you ask the question, which substance, which type of rock is considered to be the hardest of rocks in this world? The answer is the rocks of the mountains. Yes? The mountains is a rock, but it's not considered to be an ordinary rock like the stones that we find on the floors. But when you come towards this particular ayah of the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَوْ أَنزَلْنَا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى جَبَلٍ. If we were to reveal this Quran on a mountain, لَرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِعًا مُتَصَدِّعًا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. You would see this mountain split asunder. You would see this mountain split apart. It would break apart. It would be rendered into small, tiny particles. Why? Because of its humbleness and its fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yesterday we spoke about that, we ended our discussion, and I said that tonight I will talk about one of the greatest, or perhaps even the greatest cure to qaswat al-qalb, which is tilawat al-Quran, which is qira'at al-Quran. The Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi explains in one particular narration, he says the heart has the capacity to become hard like the iron, like hadid, like iron. And then he was asked, he said, how can this person whose heart has become hard like the iron be able to undo the effects? He said, through tilawat al-Quran, through qira'at al-Quran. That when a person engages and interacts with the verses of the Holy Quran, it somehow begins to affect his internal existence. It interacts with his nafs, and we'll come to that discussion in a few moments. And it's very important for us to understand that this Quran that we have in our hands today, it is the manifestation of Allah's knowledge. It is an expression of Allah's knowledge. In the hadith of the Holy Prophet, he says what? Many times he said this to his people. He said, إِنِّي تَارِكُمْ فِيكُمُ الثَّقَلَيْنِ كِتَابُ اللَّهِ وَإِتْرَةِ أَهْلِ الْبَيْتِ. That I am leaving behind two weighty things. Observe the words of the Prophet. He says, I'm leaving behind two weighty things. He doesn't say I'm leaving behind two equally weighted things. One is considered to be more heavier than the other. They are both heavy, but one is more heavier than the other. Which one is more heavier? The Quran. The Quran is known as Thiqatul Akbar. It's known as the more weightier of the two weighty things. That the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, the Itra of Rasulullah, are answerable to the Holy Quran. Their responsibility in dunya is to observe and to guard and to protect the message of the Holy Quran from misguidance, from deviation. Their responsibilities of being the Imams of the message of Rasulullah is to protect the message of the Holy Quran. That today you'll find people, and we discussed this in one of the nights of the Shahada, that people will try whatever it takes to take the verses out of context and to give it its own meaning. People will engage themselves with tafsir bil ra'i. You find that the Ahlul Bayt's responsibility is to guard the message of the Holy Quran, to protect it from deviation and misguidance. They say that's why it's very important for us to understand that this book that we have in our hands is not an ordinary book. It is an expression of Allah's knowledge. It is a divine book. The moment I hack into its spiritual essence, it has profound effects in my life. Because it's not a normal book, by necessity I must not treat it as if it's a normal book. When you refer to the riwayat of the Ahl al-Bayt, when you refer to, for example, the advices of the scholars, what do they say? When it comes to the physical Quran, there are certain aspects that we must respect. We must behave and interact with the Holy Quran differently and not treat it as if it's like a novel, For example, I must not put the Quran on the floor. I must put it on a shelf. If it's on a shelf, it has to be the highest book, for example. Yes, there must not be things on top of the Holy Quran. When I approach the Quran, I have to be tahir. I have to be in the state of purification. These are all manifestations of how I should treat and interact with the Holy Quran. It's not a normal book, therefore my interaction with it should not be like a normal book. There's a beautiful story. A man once came towards a scholar, a marja of his time. He approached the marja and he said, Sheikhna, I have a problem in my life. The Sheikh, he replies, he says, what is the problem in your life? He says that I used to wake up early in the morning. Every day in the morning, in the early hours of the morning, I used to wake up and I used to engage in tilawat al-Quran. In the olden days, especially amongst the Arabs, the people, they used to wake up early in the morning and they used to recite Quran. They didn't used to have, for example, radios and TVs and so on and so forth. So early in the mornings, they used to wake up and recite the Holy Quran. The children of the household, they used to wake up listening to their fathers or their grandfathers listening to the Holy Quran. So he says, I used to wake up in the early hours of the morning and I used to engage in the Qira'at al-Quran. But I'm not able to do that anymore. I feel that tawfiq of me being able to recite the Quran has been taken away from me. So the Sheikh said to him, he said, is there something you did in your life that you feel that this tawfiq is no longer there for you? He says, I did one thing which I regret. I immensely regret. He says, what was it? He said, I was on my way towards Mecca. I was on the verge of performing Hajj. I was going towards Hajj. When on the road in Mecca somewhere, I came across a bookshop. He said, the bookshop, I saw that there was a poster of this book being published, and this book was now available for purchase. He said, I heard about this particular book, and I was waiting for it to be published. I waited years and years. I tried to find it in my own country. I could not find that particular book. But it was there inside the bookshop. It was available for purchase. I could buy it there and then. I entered the bookshop. I found the book. And I really wanted to buy it. But there was only one problem. I did not have any money with me. So I approached the owner of the bookshop and I said to him, I don't have any money with me. But perhaps you can take some of my belongings in turn for this particular book. Barter trade, something for something else. So the owner agreed and he went through all of the things that the man possessed. And the man possessed a particular type of, he had a copy of the Holy Quran. And sometimes, the Quran, it has value. Perhaps sometimes the borders of the Quran, the bindings of the Quran is gold, for example. It's attractive. It's in a particular color from a particular publication. The paper has some form of value or whatever. The owner of the bookshop liked his Quran. He said, I'll give you this book in return for your Quran. He said, I began to think. I began to ponder. I really wanted this book. Look, I said to myself, the Quran is a book. I can buy it in my own hometown. I can buy it anywhere else. It's available, freely available sometimes. Yes? He said, I agreed. I gave him my copy of the Holy Quran in return of this book. In return of this book. He said, I made the purchase. He says, Sheikhna, from that day onwards, I realized that I was no longer able to wake up in the early hours of the morning to recite the Holy Quran. When days I used to wake up in the early hours of early hours in the morning, some things would happen and I would not have the tawfiq to recite the Holy Quran. Whether it's this thing or that thing, whether someone needs my help, whether my kids wake up, whatever it is, something would happen and I would not be able to recite the Holy Quran. Because I belittled the Quran in that moment in my life. I traded it for something that has no value compared to it. And this is important, that when it comes to our relationship with the Holy Quran, it should have a priority in our lives. Sometimes, some of us behave in such a way, we should all have a personal copy of the Holy Quran. It should not be a case where a family of 5 will have like 1 or 2 copies of the Holy Quran. Buy a copy of the Holy Quran and have a relationship with it. If the pages rip, for example, within it, mend these pages because it has sentimental value. It is your Quran. This Quran will do your intercession on the Day of Judgment. Some of us, when our pages in the Holy Quran rip, what do? We ask the Maulana, we call the Maulana, Maulana, I have the Quran, how do I dispose of it? How do I dispose of the Holy Quran? Do not dispose of it. Mend them. Yes, mend these pages and keep it with you until the day you die. Bury it with you. It will be your shafa'ah in your qubur, in your graves. So it's important for us to make sure that we do not belittle the Holy Quran. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We should engage in tilawat al-Quran. We should engage in the recitation of the Holy Quran on a daily basis. We should try and open the Holy Quran and read a verse from it, and read 2 verses, read a page from it, 10 pages. Why not? Because these have an effect in our hearts. It begins to melt away the hardness of our hearts. There's a discussion in our communities today, especially in this day and age. You find people are now coming forward and asking questions, especially those who, for example, are in charge of the madaris, of the madrasas. They come and they ask a very intriguing question. They say, Maulana, we have a trade-off. Within the madrasa, we now have a trade-off. Either we focus on tilawat al-Quran, or we focus in understanding the Quran. Which one is more important? Do we engage in tilawah, or do we engage in tafsir? The answer is both have a pivotal role in the human being's life. Both are equally important. One cannot sacrifice one for the other. And that's very important for us to understand. Our communities from the time of our forefathers and the forefathers of our forefathers have engaged in tilawat al-Quran. When the child is young, we sit down with the child and we teach them how to recite the Holy Quran. This is an investment for the future and should never be belittled. You ask anyone who has engaged themselves in learning the Quran from a young age, when they are in their 30s and their 40s, when you ask them, was it a waste of time or no? They will say that it was our investment. It was an investment that we now reap the rewards of today. A child who is in the madrasa, 15, 16-year-old, he may think it's a waste of time. But it's not a waste of time to learn and to learn to read the Holy Quran. It is an investment 20 years later. Because 20 years later, when the person becomes married, when he has children, he realizes the importance of how to read the Holy Quran. But you find people don't see this wisdom. People ask the question that we need to engage in tafsir. Should we engage in tafsir more so than tilawat al-Quran? Not necessarily. It depends on the environment, of course. Yes, you find certain communities, for example, in their curriculums and the madrasas, they've scrapped tilawat al-Quran. And they've adopted what? Tafsir of the Holy Quran. But later on, it has an impact because you now are raising a generation that do not know how to recite the Holy Quran. And when you have a generation of children who cannot recite the Holy Quran, you've blocked their investments 20 years later. Yes? You find that there is both of these have an equal importance in our lives. Tafsir can be found somewhere else. Perhaps, for example, the community can organize tafsir sessions in a mosque. Or, for example, the teachers in the madrasa should be trained to use their curriculums or their subjects and try and teach tafsir through ahkam and try and teach tafsir, for example, through aqaid. There's no problem in this. Every lesson, for example, a verse can be discussed without there being any emphasis on that class being a tafsir class. Or, for example, outside the mosque, outside in someone's houses, for example, private gatherings, it could be a tafsir gathering. Why not? This is something that should be encouraged within the community. But tilawat al-Quran should not be scrapped. Tilawat al-Quran has equal importance. You look at Rasulullah in his life. Rasulullah, we can all agree that he had profound knowledge. Second to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his knowledge is unrivaled. But never did he come forward and say that now I know the full understanding of the Holy Quran, I should not read the Holy Quran. وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Allah orders him, stand up and recite the Holy Quran. Engage in the tilawah of the Holy Quran. Rasulullah, with all his knowledge, and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, with all their knowledge, they had absolute knowledge of the Holy Quran from word to word. Yet they used to engage, sit down, and they used to recite the Holy Quran. And there's nothing wrong in that. Take the Quran, open the pages and read them. There is absolutely nothing wrong in that. That's why when you look at the history of our ulama, the greatest of our ulama always used to engage in tilawat al-Quran. Constantly they used to engage in tilawat al-Quran. You take the example of Allama Tabatabai, considered to be one of the greatest mufassirin in our madhab al-Imamiyya. They say each day he used to recite one chapter of the Holy Quran, one section of the Holy Quran, one sipara of the Holy Quran. We have 30, yes? Every month he would finish the entire Quran. And look at his reputation, considered to be one of the greatest mufassir of the Holy Quran. Today, in this day and age, you look at the examples of Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, marhum, rahmatullah alayhi, shaheed. They say in the city of Najaf, in the holy city of Najaf, he was the most sought teacher amongst his students, amongst the people. They used to run behind him, trying to learn from him, yes? They used to enjoy being his students, and he was the most demanded teacher of his time. They say that he did not have all the time in the world. Of course, if you're teaching 3-4 lessons a day, that's more than enough for a teacher, for example. His schedule was packed. From morning until evening, he would either study or he would teach. They say, however, every day in the mornings, 1 hour a day, he would go to the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam. He would sit in front of the tari and he would recite the Holy Quran. That's all he would do. He would open the Quran and he would sit in front of the tari. His students, they would come to him and they would see him in the mornings, in the early hours of the morning. They would come to him and they would say, Sayyidina, you don't have time to teach, but you have time now to sit down and recite the Holy Quran. He says, you could recite the Holy Quran in your home. Why don't you take this time to sit with us and teach us something? One of the greatest things about the Hausa is that people love to teach. Yes, they find it it's their legacy to leave behind something that they know. It's an honor to become a teacher. They would say to him, teach us, because there is more benefit in it. It just doesn't benefit you, but it benefits us, rather than reciting the Holy Quran, which benefits you and only you. He would reply, he would say, no, when I would sit in this hour reciting the Holy Quran, it is as if I am having a lesson with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. It is as if the Imam is teaching me something through these verses. So you find that the Quran is a book where it can teach us. It can revive the deadness of our hearts. Yes? That's why when you come towards the Holy Quran, you find that the Quran, there's a beautiful verse. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. That the Holy Quran was revealed in the month of Ramadan. هدى للناس. It is a guidance for mankind. The Quran has the power and the capacity to take the human being from dhulma, from darkness, and places him in nur. It has the power to move the person from darkness and place him in light. The scholars came forward and they explained this beautifully. They said that when a person begins to read the verses of the Holy Quran, the Quran somehow begins to interact with the nafs of the human being. The Quran in this particular verse explains that the verses of the Quran, it interacts with the mind and it interacts with the nafs. He says the Quran begins to interact with our nafs, with our ruh, with our souls, with our spirits. Yes? And the examples are there within the Holy Quran, mentioned within the Holy Quran. Even today in our contemporary day and age, the examples are there. You find, for example, when you refer to certain ayats of the Holy Quran, when Rasulullah used to approach the people of Mecca, and he used to read the Quran towards them, what did they reply? They used to say, this person is a magic, he's a magician. Yes, this person has come with magic. Why magic? Why was Rasulullah considered to be a magician? Because whenever they used to listen to the words of the Holy Quran, it would have an impact in their nafs. Their nafs would struggle to listen to the Holy Quran. Their aql would stop them, but their nafs would want to listen to the Holy Quran. The Quran would talk and interact with their nafs, with their ruh. Their nafs would hold on to the verses of the Holy Quran, but their aql would stop them. They had this innate feeling that they could not stop. That's why they came forward and they said, Rasulullah is a magician. He's a madman. Yes, he's come with something which is paranormal. It's not part of this world. The Arabs, they used to come and they used to say, Lawla lawla ha. They used to say, for example, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا نُزِّلَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى رَجُلٍ مِّنَ الْقَرْيَتَيْنِ عَظِيمٍ. Why was this Quran revealed to a man of Why was this Quran not revealed to a man of importance in the two towns, in the two cities? Which two cities? In the city of Mecca and Ta'if. They used to come forward and say, this Quran is such a powerful Quran. Why was it not given to a man of importance? Why was it given to a man like a shepherd like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa alayhi? This Quran is a book. It's a powerful book. It demands that it goes into the hands of the most powerful and the rich, the hierarchies of society, not a shepherd like Rasulullah. Yes, so you find they used to admit that the Quran was a book of power and a book of unlike any other books. You find, for example, when Walid ibn Mughira was listening to the Holy Quran, when Rasulullah challenged him with a few handful of verses, they say Walid ibn Mughira, the one who was considered to be the powerful, most learned scholar when it comes to the Arabic language, when he heard the verses of the Holy Quran, he retreated to his house. He locked the doors and he confined himself in his house for 3 days. 3 days because of the effect of the Quran in his heart. Look at, for example, قُلْ أُوهِيَ إِلَيَّ أَنَّهُ اسْتَمَعَ نَفَرٌ مِنَ الْجِنِّ فَقَالُوا سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا. That when Rasulullah was reciting the Holy Quran, a group from amongst the jinn were walking past. Yes? When they heard the verses of the Holy Quran, they said, سَمِعْنَا قُرْآنًا عَجَبًا. That we have heard the most powerful of verses, verses which are strange, verses which have not come from human beings, but verses which are divine. When we recite the Holy Quran, it has an impact in our lives. It affects us from within. Yes? It begins to change our lives for the better. Even though we may not be able to experience it, even though we may not be able to observe the effects of the Qira'at al-Quran in our hearts, it most definitely has an effect in our hearts. Imagine the household. If this is the effect that the Quran has on our hearts, imagine the household where, for example, the wife or the mother is pregnant. And when she engages in listening to the Holy Quran, imagine the effect that it has in the fetus in the womb. Today, alhamdulillah, we should do shukr of Allah that we have technology in our hands. We can easily turn on the TV and listen to channels that is dedicated towards Qira'at al-Quran. In the olden days, they didn't have this. A person would actually physically have to recite the Holy Quran, and that takes effort. Yes, to sit and to recite the Holy Quran. At times we may be tired, at times we may be lazy. But today there's no excuse. We have, for example, MP3 players. Yes, a person can easily recite the Holy Quran. And by listening to the verses of the Holy Quran, it has an impact in one's life. Imagine the household where the children are raised listening to the Holy Quran, where when they come home from school, they have to recite the Quran or they have to listen to the Holy Quran. Imagine the household where Quran is a part and parcel in one's life. It creates discipline in one's life. It creates spirituality. It softens the heart. And this is not something that, this is not something unmanly to say. When a person has a soft heart, it means that his aql guides him in his life. Whereas when a man has a hardened heart, it means that his desires prevail in his life. It means that his desires are his imam. But a person who has a soft heart, it means that his aql is his imam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq, to allow us to establish a relationship with the Holy Quran, and to end with the hadith of the Holy Prophet, where a single verse in the month of Ramadan is considered to be equal to the entire Quran. The effects of the Quran and the recitation of the Holy Quran in this month is far greater than outside this month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that tawfiq, inshaAllah. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.